Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Morgan Mills, Senior Talent Director here at FloodGate, and I am with the amazing Renee Chang, another talent director here, and we lead the clinical recruiting desk here at FloodGate. So we were former nurses before. I come from an ICU nursing background. Renee did emergency room as well as nursing informatics, and I've been fielding a ton of questions from you guys, healthcare professional nurses, PTs, OTs, MDs, all of the acronyms, and I'm excited to get the opportunity to really chat through, creative ways or creative careers, utilizing your clinical licensures and backgrounds. So I wanted a platform for us to chat through what that looks like, different opportunities specific to the medical device industry. That's what we've been doing this whole time. So we're excited to chat with you. And we'll kind of get started. Renee, can you tell us a little bit about what titles, what type of roles you typically see in medical device that you can be a part of in med device?
Sure. But before I answer that question, please feel free while we're talking to put your comments or questions in the comments section. And then when we're done, we will take some questions. But yeah, so Morgan's absolutely right. There are lots of opportunities for nurses. If you are, let's say, a bedside nurse, you're working in the CVICU and you are interested in, going into medical device, a clinical specialist role, also known as a clinical consultant,
Clinical
educator, sometimes a field rep or patient service rep might be the right fit for you. It is a more field-based and education-based position. The other positions, if you are, maybe you're working in patient care or in a hospital now in research, quality, regulatory, you want to look for and you want to leverage that experience. You want to look for, a clinical research analyst position. You want to look for, a clinical regulatory specialist and maybe a clinical quality analyst as well. So those are just a few, and those might be more office-based positions.
Yeah, you kind of separate the two, right? So you have your commercial type roles. Those are your clinical specialists, clinical educators. For the sake of this segment, we're probably going to focus mostly there. Those are a lot of the roles that are usually open. And then like Renee mentioned, the more in-house roles, more like research side, are those clinical research associates, medical science liaisons, the other roles you mentioned. So you kind of have a lot of different options, right?
Yeah, and no matter what, this position really requires a high clinical aptitude, somebody that is used to working with high performers like most nurses are, right? A clinical specialist, especially, you need to be relationship oriented because it is a sales position. You are supporting sales. You are helping sell the evidence and the data behind your product. So, just really being, high energy, relationship oriented, and then evidence based. And then also a team oriented.
Yep.
So if you have to like working with teams. So.
Yep. Yeah. And while we're great transition, tell us a little bit about what the actual day-to-day looks like for a clinical specialist or a clinical educator.
Sure. So, the day-to-day, and I think that this is why a lot of times nurses fit clinical specialist roles so well, is because no day is like the one before. So,
we certainly know that's the way in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. You have no idea what you're walking into.
Yeah.
The ICU or the ER. So, one day, like if using that example, I'm a cardiac nurse. I went to work for a company that sells a cardiac pump or a cardiac product. And, one day I could be in the OR working with the surgeon, helping them, implant or, just advising them on how to use it. What happens if something else, if the product, doesn't work quite right, help them navigate through that. And then the very next day, I could be working and doing an in-service with the nurses in the CVICU on that post-op care, how to educate that patient on the product. So really kind of two different areas there.
Being a subject matter expert. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yep. So the very next day, I could be at my home office or in an office, depending on the company that you work for. and really working on your strategy and, planning your days ahead. Maybe you have a speaking event that, some clinical specialists are required to do maybe a once a month speaking event and a once a month in service. So, maybe you're planning for that, you're writing your script, your curriculum at your office. But yeah, no day looks the same. And when you think about the shift work of a nurse, going in, you remember those days, either if you're working night shift or day shift, starting at 7 a.m. I'd come in and I'd say, Morgan, here's your case, here's your patients that you need to take care of, and you're off and running. Doesn't look like that at all.
Welcome and structured, right? Like, pill pass or like different procedures are scheduled, but there's a lot of flexibility in this role, even though you have, set things you need to do.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So welcome to the world of salary and bonuses, not clocking in and clocking out, and being really autonomous. You have to be a self-starter. No one's going to tell you to go get credentialed at different hospitals in your area or in your region that you're covering. No one's going to tell you to renew your nursing license and do your CEUs. You have to go out there and get it. Nobody's going to serve up a lead for you as far as, who might be interested in buying your product or using your product. You have to go make those relationships your own, yourself.
Or if you see a need because you're educating in those settings, like she talked about in the day-to-day, like you'll be letting your rep know, right? The end goal is to always improve patient outcomes, and you're the go-to for the devices because you're that subject matter expert.
Right.
And on that, we'll kind of segue to, can you tell us a little bit about travel? Travel is definitely is significant for these roles. So can you tell us a little bit about what the travel looks like?
So you can expect to travel with these roles, and it really just depends on the company and how many other clinical specialists and really how widespread their product is. So, you could be locally based where, we're in Tampa, Florida. I could go to TGH one day. The next day I could go, maybe 2 hours south to Venice. I have like a local, a regional area. It could be that you're splitting the greater United States in half, and you're working, east, and somebody else is working west coast. So you'll have some air travel. And if it's a startup company, you might be working a national, you might be, covering the entire US. And some of those, startup companies are really a good way to get your foot in the door, wear a lot of hats, and, just have a really exciting career.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think we're ready to transition. So really, Morgan, tell me, where do I start? I'm an ICU nurse. I got a ton of experience, or maybe I'm an interventional radiology nurse. I got a ton of experience with devices because my area is a high procedure area. I meet a lot of reps. I know a lot of different kind of clinical situations where devices should be used and how they be used effectively. And I'm kind of interested in medical device. Where do I start?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the first thing, and probably the most important thing when I'm recruiting on these roles for my medical device companies, it starts with understanding the position, right? Which I think is really why we have this platform here today, and that's research, right? So just like you mentioned, if you're in the cardiac catheterization lab and you see these clinicals and they're educating on the devices, like talk to them, right? What's your day-to-day look like? And really diving into what that looks like. If you don't have someone in your setting, LinkedIn's huge. Hop on LinkedIn, look at med device companies, type in clinical specialist titles. Everyone's so nice in this industry that if you're looking to transition, they're going to want to, give you a little overview. So I would say definitely research and working your network. And again, network is those people or reps or actual clinical educators that are in your settings that you've seen.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, some of those other names for our clinical specialist, what were they? Clinical educator, a patient service rep,
clinical consultant.
Most
commonly will be your clinical specialist. Those are usually the main couple.
Yeah,
types for sure.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. So you've done your research. You found a clinical specialist position that you want to apply for. I know it's tricky. It's way different than being a nurse and showing up, to apply for a job, doing patient care.
Yeah.
Tell us some of the tips and tricks that, we should know about to navigate, applying, interviewing, all those things and nailing the job.
Totally. Yeah, I will say med device interviewing is a very different experience than healthcare. If you applied an ICU job and you have an ICU nursing background, one interview and you probably got the job. Med device is different, right? You probably have anywhere from 3 to 5 formal interviews in the process. So you really have to set yourself up for success if you're wanting to break in. So a couple tips. First and foremost, re-up your resume. I read a slew of nursing resumes. I had one myself. Looking back, I'm like, ooh.
Mine was terrible.
Yes, it's terrible. And by terrible, we just mean, you list RN, Tampa General, ICU unit, right? But you have to be specific. So I always say re-up your resume. Make the investment to have a professional look at it. When you're looking at your transitions clinically, be specific. If you're in the intensive care unit, I know what you're doing, but someone reading the resume from Med Device who doesn't have a clinical background may not. So what are you doing? What's your patient population? What procedure types are you involved with? What physician types do you work with? Do you charge? Are you a charge nurse? Do you deal with budgeting too when you're doing that? Are you a part of the infection prevention committee? If you are, have you helped in any outcomes? Be specific there. I think you had a great example of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I was also thinking about, so if you used a product, so if you're applying to a company and you've actually used their product, say that.
Yeah.
That's they're going to look for that, and that's gold. But yeah, absolutely. If you are a clinical nurse leader, if you're on any kind of committees and you're doing, just any of that is really applicable, especially if you're applying for some of those other positions, like quality, and you're kind of
like outcomes based, right? So if you're on the infection prevention committee and you helped reduce CLAPSIs, right? Like what are those numbers? So again, be specific. And of course, you're welcome to reach out to me and Renee. We'd love to look it over and help you out. Yeah. Next, research. I'll go back to it again and again. And this is more specific to actual interviewing, but the managers will know if you just scan over the site. And honestly, you're going to want to dive in, right? Like, what are the products? What do they do? What's the company? What's their mission? Who's their leadership teams? You don't need to know everything, especially on like the initial interview, but do your due diligence. It will go a very long way. Motive. This is a big one. Working with a lot of my hiring managers, we know as healthcare providers and as nurses, we love to teach, right? That's literally what we live and breathe to do. But go a little deeper than, I just want to educate. Whatever that means for you, whatever right time it is for you to make this transition into business, outside of the bedside, you would still get to make such an impact clinically, but you're not, it's different. So figure out what that is for you internally and why you want to make a change.
Yeah, I actually had an example of a candidate not too long ago that said, I am doing everything I can to help my community and the patients that come in that, are right in front of me. But with this opportunity, I can really scale my practice and I can make more of an impact on, not just my community, but my region or the entire US. So
that's perfect.
Have a good motive of why you're there and why you want this.
Totally. And then sell yourself, right? I mean, naturally, I think we're humble as nurses. We want to help others, and we're sometimes, more often than not, very quiet in doing so. We love to do it. But, no one is going to sell yourself but you. So in these interview processes, like, you're going to be commanding a room of physicians or nurses. So you got to be able to, be confident, be humble, and brag, right? Like, if you assisted with these devices in the cardiac catheterization lab, tell us about it on the interview.
And everybody went to you because you were the expert. And you knew how to fix it. You knew how to make it work.
Totally.
So if you were the subject matter expert and you really knew, especially if it's their device, tell them that.
Absolutely. Questions is huge. I mean, you're making a life transition, right? You should absolutely be prepared in the interview process with a couple good questions. And a question I always get about preparing questions is, what should I ask? There's really no right or wrong around that. I think you have to gear your questions around you understanding the day-to-days, the role, the company, what you're going to be doing, business objectives for the company to whatever is going to lead to success in that role. So just bring good questions. There is no right or wrong. I think the only thing you could do wrong is if you don't have questions.
Yes. And what about closing? Like, we hear about that all the time. Like, okay, you need to close the interview. Like, what do you recommend for clinicians to do in that case?
asking for a next step, like, hey, this was so great. I know, we're at the end of our time, but, what are the next steps? I'm so excited, coming off of this conversation. And then even more than that is follow up. So please, please, please make sure you are sending a follow up thank you email to your managers after each and every step. I kid you not, this isn't just clinical, but it's sales. You can lose out in the interview process simply by not following up. I mean, the job is, sales. So that's preparation and follow up. So those are some of the biggest things I've coached on. And if you're doing it right, a lot of my clinicians have landed jobs, even not having all of the backgrounds or requirements. And it's been the favorite part of my job. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Great. Thanks, Morgan. And I think one of the things is, asking them, do I have your endorsement to move forward?
Yeah.
Really asking that and giving them the opportunity to ask any clarifying questions in the interview process. So right then and there, do you see anything on my resume that, you're concerned about, that I'm not the right fit for this? And so then you're able to live in real time, rebuttal that, or, get that all, clarified.
For sure.
But I think we are kind of at the end of our questions.
We've done a lot of talking. Now we want to hear from you guys.
So if we don't have any questions, I have a few for you, Morgan.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I know I get a lot of questions about career trajectory. So, all right, now I'm in my clinical specialist role. Now what? Where do I go from here? Like, is there a ladder? Is there a senior position, a manager position? Where could I go from here?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. I think a lot of it is going to depend on your company, like bigger versus smaller. But I would say your trajectory is going to be usually different levels of clinical specialist. So you'll see it written as, clinical specialist 2 or 3, similar to our clinical ladder we typically have in nursing, or you'll see senior clinical specialist or executive clinical specialist. And a lot of that is compensation based, right? You are the experts of the experts on their devices, and you are pretty much the right hand man or woman to the sales reps in the area. Then there's also clinical leadership, right? So as your organization gets bigger, if you're in those senior executive level or principal level clinical specialist roles, you're more than likely going to be the trainer, which ultimately leads to clinical management or leadership. On the flip side, sometimes you get in these roles and you are just meant for sales, right? So sales is more lucrative on the bonus compensation side. So
there's has like a lower bonus or has a lower base salary,
the bigger earning potential. So you absolutely, I talked to clinicals and they just crushed it, and they're very sales oriented. As clinicians, I feel like you're either one or the other, but sometimes we morph into salespeople.
Yeah.
So definitely there's that whole sales route you can go to as well, and it's a great foot in the door type med device too. So
yeah, perfect. So what you said is clinical specialist, senior clinical specialist, or maybe like a 1, 2, and then a principal specialist, right? Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Or management. Absolutely.
And then I have one other question for you. All right. Sorry. We can have one more minute. As far as
like, put me on the hot seat.
I know. Well, and I can chime in here too, but I think so. I maybe jumped over this, but onboarding. Like, so now I've landed my role.
Yeah.
And how do I become that subject matter expert? I use the product every once in a while, every once in a blue moon. But do companies have training or allow me to really grow like my communication skills, my skills on the different situations or the indications of the device?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I get that question on my probably almost every screening call, right? Because you're going in blind, right? You are a bedside nurse and now you're expected to educate in med device on products that are FDA regulated. They are very sensitive to that. So I can't even name one company that we've worked with over the years that doesn't have a really good training process in place. So that's going to be a combination usually of corporate level training, whether that's simulations, modules, etc., and then always a huge element of actual field-based training. So you're with your manager, you're with those senior level clinicals or field sales trainers. going to all of the accounts in your region, assisting in virtually, hopefully, every procedure type or situation you would use the device until you're at the level you would be able to do that on your own. And that onboarding period looks different for I think everyone. They're never usually going to throw you to the wolves because again, you have to know what you're doing in those settings. So really good. And then there's always not only on the devices, but just on med device in general, the regulations around that, the credentialing for these areas. So usually you get to cover it all and you feel fairly confident.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then I think it's really helpful also to grab a mentor.
Yeah.
You know, you want somebody that you can, you know, trust and you can go to when you do get stuck, or maybe you have that one-off chance where you do kind of are unfamiliar, maybe a little bit thrown to the wolves. But building relationships is key when you're starting out, and
totally.
you know, asking for help early on.
For sure.
So,
No, those were great. Those were great.
All right. Do we have any other questions? All right. Do you want to ask this one?
Yeah, well, this might be more in your wheelhouse. So I'll just read it off. What if you come from a public health RN background? Do you think it's necessary to work in a hospital before this transition?
All right, Stephanie, thank you for that question. Yeah, so public health, you know, usually is not like a main funnel for clinical specialists. I haven't seen too many. It's usually the heavy procedure based, you know, CVICU, interventional radiology, interventional cardiology, cath lab, that we see a lot of nurses transitioning.
And stuff, right?
Yeah. No,
So,
I mean, if it is heavy, you know, population health management that you're doing in public health, for sure, like, you know, a clinical science liaison, epidemiology, research are all, you know, great, you know, kind of leverage like segues and a good path to go down for somebody in public health. But if those aren't in your wheelhouse, you know, maybe
might be something to consider
Yeah.
would be getting that clinical experience. So getting in the hospital setting, if you wanted to be with a cardiology company that needed IR cath lab experience, I'd probably spend a year or 2 or 3 there, and then you'd be a shoo-in for those opportunities. But just like she said, there's those windows of opportunity too, if that's what you're open to.
Yeah, great question. All right, I'll read this one. All right, so Gracie says, if you've only been in healthcare industry for a couple of years, are you still able to break into clinical sales, or are they looking for ample healthcare experience? Okay, great question. Do you want to talk about
I can take that. A couple things. It depends on the opportunity, right? There are a lot of clinical specialist roles that are very niche in what you need to have for a clinical background. But then there's also some, they're actually termed more like clinical sales specialist or clinical sales associate. And you can either have a couple years of outside sales, or you could be a clinician wanting to break in, but doesn't really matter necessarily what your background is. So I know this doesn't answer the question, but it just depends on the company and like their requirements. And if you're not sure, again, like please ping me on LinkedIn or Renee.
What do you mean when you say outside sales?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Perfect. Outside sales means you've sold something, whether that's a TV or papers or copiers, pretty much like kind of business to business, or you've sold something outside, I would say, business to business related. Yeah.
Or like a lot of our companies like experience from larger companies that really do a good job at sales training.
Yeah.
You know, like you'll go through like a 6-month internship of just sales training first. And so look for those companies that really offer that support.
And I will say too, on that note, if you're a nurse who is like, I want to do sales, right? Like I don't want to educate. I love to do it, but I just feel that burning passion, which was kind of me before I met my boss, and now I'm here and love what I do. But I wanted med device sales. I was like, that's where I want to go. I don't want to be a specialist. And I kept applying to all of these sales roles, and no one would look at, I didn't land an interview. So I was told I actually found a mentor, and she was like, hey, like, I know it stinks, but I was a nurse for X amount of years. I went back and sold TVs for 3 years, kicked it out of the park.
Wow.
And I landed my dream sales role in med device. So if you are wanting that transition, the best thing you can do rather than spinning your wheels applying, if you don't have sales experience as a nurse, get it under your belt, and then you are going to be the first person they pick up that phone, because you not only have sales now, you have clinical. So I also would make that recommendation if you have a burning passion for sales like I did.
Yeah, and that's a big risk. And I think some other things that I've heard of, is maybe getting a certification. There's lots of training courses out there on sales.
For sure.
There are ways that you can show that your skills that you're doing right now as a clinician, taking care of patients, are very transferable into sales.
Totally.
Because you're selling, if you're a physical therapist, you're selling your product, which is physical therapy, to that patient, so they keep coming back. You're selling compliance. If you take this medication, your cancer will go in remission. So if you're able to convince somebody, or if, like Morgan, you said a great example earlier about CLABSP, and if I am saying, okay, I'm the head of our CLABSP committee, and I reduce the number of infections, of central line infections, by this number, you're talking about your outcomes. You're talking about like your individual impact in the hospital, in patient care. And that translates really well in a sales setting, because they're looking at those quantitative data metrics, outcomes that show your value.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think we have one more.
Oh, okay. I'll read it. Okay, this is from Joe McClung. He says, what are the top attributes that make someone successful in the industry? Great question.
We'll gear it, I guess, for his clinical maybe for this one, since we're talking about what I notice, I think the most, and I've recruited so many different types of clinical roles from so many different types of clients. And what I'm noticing in my tenure in this is, I'll go back to motive, right? Like, you really understand the role. Like, you really are autonomous and self-motivated. You really want to make an impact at the business level. You want to get the products in the hands of as many people as you can to improve a patient outcome. So I will say, no matter what your clinical background is, even when I am screening and I need someone with urology nursing experience, I can go to my manager and be like, hey, she does not have urology. She's an ICU nurse. It's only been 3 years, but this girl knows what she's doing. She has researched the role. Her motive's spot on. She has fire in her belly. And she lands the role, right? So I think it's really, I would say, understanding the position and wanting to make the change and transition into the industry from healthcare.
Yeah.
It's very general, but
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I would just, I would add, a really good communicator. So somebody
absolutely
that can really articulate the value of something, and you're almost just by natural and innate persuasive speaker. I would also say, somebody just with a high clinical aptitude and is a high performer. You're always looking to achieve. You're always looking to, like you said, the fire in the belly, right?
Yeah.
So always looking to improve and grow. And team oriented.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be good at working with a team, building relationships, and most nurses like to talk. We like to talk. So I think that if you can talk to people and you can make connections, really genuine connections, those are some key attributes that I think will make you successful.
100%. Totally agree.
All right. So what time do we have? So
I think that's about it. So any other questions you guys have, drop them in. Between me or Renee, we will try and reach out and answer them. And if this, if you guys liked what you heard, we're hoping maybe we'll do a second segment to really, answer a couple other things we didn't get to hit here. But it's been fun, and I hope you guys got some nuggets to helping your transition.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.